All right, so here is our workshop on plants versus animal cells. So, most of this should hopefully be review from middle school, but I just want to make sure that we can go through all this information. All right, so here are some images of plants versus animal cells. Obviously, you can tell first there's some differences in shape. The plant cell has a much more rigid structure and is more of a square shape, whereas the animal cell is more oval. Animal cells can be all different types of shapes. So you think about a red blood cell versus a kidney cell versus a lung cell. All of them are probably going to be different shapes just depending on the location that they're needed. You also can see that there are quite a few things in black that are common between the two, and I'll get to those in a moment. And then the things that are in green and red are things that are different between the two different cells as far as structure wise. So plant cells obviously have to go through photosynthesis, so chloroplasts are necessary for that. They also have a cell wall that gives it its structure, and also something called plasmodesmata that allows for plant cells to communicate with each other and allows for the cytoplasm to kind of mix with other plant cells. And that's important for allowing for the capillary action that we learned about in the water lab. So in animal cells, centrioles are different, lysosomes, and then centrosomes, which we'll talk about here on the next slide. So here's a Venn diagram that you've probably seen similar ones that show similarities and differences between the plants and animals. So let's start with similarities. So they are eukaryotic, and as a reminder, eukaryotic means that it is multicellular, that it has a nucleus, and that it has membrane bound organelles. So, we'll talk more about eukaryotic cells in the next workshop video. Both of these also have mitochondria, so they have to be able to produce energy for themselves, and that is what the mitochondria is responsible with doing, creating ATP. Also, vacuoles are present in both, but in the plant cell, it's much larger because plant cells need to be able to have rigidity or turgor pressure, as it's called, and that's caused by the vacuole, which allows it to store lots of water. Whereas animal cells don't have to have such a large vacuole because animal cells are more likely than not going to be in a very high percentage water based organism. They both have nucleus, ribosomes, and a cytoplasm. They both are going to produce proteins that are made from the ribosomes. They both store and pass along genetic material, and then they have cell to cell communication. So, a lot of times with animal cells, it's like receptors that communicate with each other, whereas plant cells use the plasmodesmata that we talked about. So for animal cells, things that make it different, it contains centrioles. So those are very important in cell division. It's kind of the anchor for the spindle fibers to allow for cell division and mitosis to occur. Lysosomes are going to keep the cell's waste checked out, so make sure that things are not going to be left in the cell that could be toxic. Like I said, around a regular shape, and then it divides via creating a cleavage furrow. So it kind of pinches off, and that's what creates the division of animal cells. So that's different in a plant cell. If you look at the last bullet point here, that it divides via a cell plate. And so instead of actually dividing via a cleavage furrow, it divides by just creating a cell plate in between the two different cells. I already talked about the bullet point before that with plasmodesmata. So, as I said, it helps with capillary action. It allows for the different cells creating their different cells that are within the plant to be able to communicate with each other to transmit materials. Since there's a lot of different things that need to be moved around, and think about plants are very tall a lot of times in relation to the size of a cell, and so they have to be able to communicate with each other. They also contain a rigid cell wall for shape and protection, and so plants, that's that fiber that we talked about in the biochemistry unit, and how that fibrous tissue is what allows for the shape of the plants. And so it's actually on the outside of the cell membrane. So both of these have these cell membranes, but the plant has a cell wall on the outside to be able to protect it and to give it that more structured square shape. Plants also contain chloroplasts for photosynthesis, like I talked about at the beginning. So that's a pretty basic review, but it's the necessary things. There's not much else that you would need to know. So I hope that helped you as a review of plant and animal cells.